Hello and welcome to all our listeners of Relukata. I am Vakas, your host today. Hope you're all well, especially given the circumstances in the world right now. And hope you're all protecting yourself against this new coronavirus by following the guidelines, necessary guidelines. And this way, we are not only going to protect ourselves, but also the other vulnerable people in our society. Anyway, this is a cricket podcast, and today we are going to talk about Pakistan Super League, PSL that is. As you probably all know that PSL is still going ahead, albeit the schedule has been rejigged a little. Now, instead of a qualification route top four for the top four teams to qualify for the final, there will be two straight semifinals and then a final to decide the champion of this season. Uh, as you saw yesterday, that the round robin stage finished, and four teams have qualified for the semifinals. Multan Sultans, they were the first place team, and then Karachi Kings, followed by Lahore Qalandars and Peshawar Zalmi. So, two of the former big three of PSL have crashed out. That is Quetta Gladiators and Islamabad United. So, in this podcast, we will discuss what went well for the qualifying teams and what went wrong for the two teams that did not qualify this time. All that and more I will be talking to with my guest, Freddie Wilde. Hello, Freddie.
Hi, mate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure having you. Freddie, I will introduce you a little. Freddie is a cricket analyst for Sky Sports and Fox Sports. He has worked with Melbourne Renegades as an analyst as well. And just recently, a few months ago, he has authored a fascinating book, Cricket 2.0, focusing on the T20 cricket revolution and its effects on the world of cricket. So I will suggest that you get your hands on it as soon as possible.
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, you're welcome. So this PSL season, we have seen that Freddie has been informing us a lot through our Twitter timelines with his analysis, stats, and interpretation of the matches. Therefore, we have taken this opportunity to talk to him today ahead of the semifinals tomorrow, and in the backdrop of what has gone on during the round robin stage. So I will start with the first question. First of all, Freddie, what do you think how the first full PSL season that was played in Pakistan, how did it go?
Well, I think it's been fantastic. I mean, it's worth saying, I think, that the PSL has been a really good quality league for a number of years now, thanks largely to the quality of domestic players in Pakistan, the quality of overseas players that have generally played in the PSL. So the quality of cricket in the PSL has always been really good. Now, in the past, obviously, it's been played largely in the UAE. And I think as a result, it's not sort of quite maybe received the fanfare around the world and the sort of hype as perhaps it's deserved, because it's been played in front of largely empty stadiums. Obviously, that's now happened towards the end of this season for reasons outside of the PCB's control. But bringing the PSL home has been a huge success. I mean, I think it's been fantastic to see the crowds that have turned out at all the venues. And I think it's really elevated the PSL. I think, as I said, for a while on a cricket quality level, it's right up there. But now, to sort of see that, being played in front of huge crowds with fantastic atmospheres, it's been really good to see. I think, in fact, I went as far as to say on Twitter the other day, it's the return of the PSL to Pakistan is probably one of the most significant moments in the history of T20 cricket, actually. I think we've seen, the sort of way that teams that 4 or 5 years ago didn't even exist can mean so much to so many people and can create such a fantastic buzz and atmosphere in all these stadiums around Pakistan. And obviously, Pakistan's been starved of high quality international cricket or even domestic cricket, at home for a number of years now. We've seen it come back in drips and drabs. But the first 3 weeks of this tournament, obviously up until the point now where it's sadly being played behind closed doors, but obviously entirely necessarily. But the first 3 weeks of this tournament have been absolutely fantastic. It's been really special to see the turnout and the buzz that the tournament's created.
Yes, definitely. It has been much more fun watching PSL this season. I mean, in the previous seasons, there were some very good and close games, but due to the lack of crowds in the stands, maybe the atmosphere wasn't so great. But this season, as you said, as the crowds have turned out in numbers, so it has been much more fun. So I will stick to that, and I will ask you, how do you see PSL developing in the future if we consider that the security situation, we hope that it will become even better in the future. So how do you see PSL developing in the future?
Well, I think it's a fantastic league, and I think that it's right. The IPL is without a doubt the top domestic T20 league, but I think that the PSL is second to that in terms of quality, and now obviously, as I said, in terms of the sort of fanfare that it can generate. The one of the really good things about the PSL is that because there are only 6 teams, you get this in the Caribbean as well. You get a lot of good quality players because you don't have to spread the talent too thinly. It'll be interesting to see how and when the PSL looks to expand, whether it moves towards 8 teams potentially. I think that maybe will be a couple of years down the line. But I can just see the PSL getting, going from strength to strength, really. I think that one of the things that was really good this year is obviously with the move back to Pakistan, people were a little bit unsure as to how many high quality overseas players would commit to playing in the tournament. But essentially, there was no one who didn't. One name that stands out, I suppose, is De Villiers, who has played it in the past but didn't put his name into the draft rather. But he doesn't play that often nowadays. So other than him, I can't really think of many players who didn't choose to come and play in the PSL due to security, which is fantastic. And, it's obviously credit to the PCB and the guys running the league for creating a situation whereby the players feel like they can come over to Pakistan. And yeah, as I said, I think the combination of those really good overseas players, some good domestic talent, some big crowds, it's been a great season, and hopefully that can continue into the future. Obviously, I suppose the next logical step will be playing more games for each team at their home venue rather than sort of at the moment it sort of moves from city to city in sort of chunks, I suppose. The IPL and the Big Bash has got sort of a model whereby obviously a team has their home venue and they move around within that. I understand for security reasons, certain areas of Pakistan, maybe that's still not possible, but I see that being the next big evolution, probably in the next year, 3 years, and then potentially an expansion towards 8 teams a little bit further down the line.
Yes, certainly. Having home and away games for all of the PSL teams will add to it. Right now, it seems a bit distant in the future. Probably Peshawar Zalmi will start playing at their home ground next season, as one of the PCB officials said at the start of this tournament this season. So let's hope for that. Anyway, let's move on to this season, and I would like you to review all the teams that have played in PSL, their strengths, their weaknesses, what worked for them and what did not. So starting from Islamabad United, we can analyze all teams and then go all the way up to the first team that has qualified as number 1, that is Multan Sultans.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for a start, one thing that's worth saying as well is that the move to, obviously, I think you alluded to at the top of the show, 2 of the big 3, the big 3 being Islamabad, Quetta and Peshawar, who have historically been dominant in the PSL, haven't made it into the playoffs or the semi-finals as they now are. There are various reasons play there for why that might have happened. But one thing I think is worth saying is I think the move to Pakistan has seen a radical change in the nature of cricket that's being played. I think we've seen, obviously the majority of the previous seasons were played in the UAE. Run rates were quite low comparatively by a global standard. And there was quite a distinctive nature of cricket related to that. Obviously, now we've seen them move to Pakistan. The boundaries have been brought in, I think, specifically with a view towards the World T20 in Australia. I think some of the PCB said that they wanted to sort of create, some guys clearing the ropes regularly and giving them confidence to do that. The pitches have also been really flat. And what we've seen is a very high-scoring tournament. The run rate this year has been 8.72 runs and over, which is actually the second highest in any T20 competition anywhere in the world. The only one that's higher is the 2018 T20 Blast in England. So we've seen a very high-scoring competition. And the reason for that, as I said, has been a massive increase in the boundary percentage. About 1 in 5 balls are going to the rope for 4 or 6. And I think that change in the nature of cricket has given the league a little bit of a shake. As I said, Islamabad and Quetta, 2 of the big 3, haven't made it through. I think whilst there are various factors at play there, one of them is the fact that the nature of cricket has changed. It's teams who have built their success around the way that cricket's played in the UAE have now had to adjust. And we'll get onto Islamabad in a moment. They have made some adjustments, but obviously, these changes have sort of unsettled strategies that have worked for a while. So I think that's one key theme that's been apparent throughout the season.
Yes, certainly. There have been a lot of high-scoring matches. As you said, the average run rate has been much higher than what we have seen before.
Yeah, and I think that leads quite nicely onto Islamabad United then, who obviously they finished last this year, and I think we can trying to distill why they didn't get through. And I think it probably boils down ultimately to their bowling. So historically, the PSL has been a league whereby there's often a very high supply of domestic bowlers. Pakistan produces a lot of, particularly quick bowlers, produced a lot of quick bowlers. So what you see is teams will generally look to stock their overseas players with batsmen and then rely on Pakistani bowlers to do the work in that department. Islamabad, as most teams do, have done that again this year. They've obviously had a very overseas or batting heavy overseas balance. Before Steyn arrived, all 4 of their overseas players were batsmen. Once Steyn arrived, they had 3. So they obviously had Ronke, Munro, Ingram, Milan was in and out. So they set up their team as most teams look to do with that batting heavy approach. The trouble for them this year was their bowling just didn't really didn't have the quality of other teams and didn't have the quality of previous seasons. We've seen guys like Mohammed Sami, Rahman Race in the past as well. Mohammed Irfan used to be there too. At Islamabad, they sort of had a strong Pakistani bowling core. This year, they moved. They've sort of had a younger set of bowlers, I guess. Guys like Akif and Musa were given a lot more responsibility. And I think the trouble for them has just simply been that those young quicks. And guys like Rahman Race, who had a lot of responsibility, along with Fahim Ashraf, who are 2 of the more experienced guys, I suppose. Those guys just didn't quite, they weren't in form, or maybe they weren't quite at the level they needed to be to compete with the other guys. And as a result, what we saw is their batting needed to be essentially perfect for them to win games. They were often they were going to be involved in high-scoring games because they had such a powerful batting order, but they had a vulnerable bowling attack. And it meant that they were, as I said, they had to be near perfect with the bat. And I think what we saw is that they were very good they were solid in the power play. They were good through the middle. Shadab's promotion was an inspired move. He worked brilliantly through the middle. But then they were a little bit vulnerable, I suppose, in the last 5. Asif Ali, who struggled for form for a while now, had another quite poor, or had quite a poor season. He struggled for form with Pakistan on the international stage, and he's not had a particularly good season this year. And so what happened is they'd put themselves in very good positions in the first sort of 15 overs or so, and then they'd not quite capitalise on that in the last 5. And as a result, whilst it would be wrong to say their batting was the problem, their bowling was definitely the problem. Their batting needed to be very, very good to be good enough to put scores that were going to be beyond teams chasing down against that bowling attack. They obviously, Islamabad obviously recognised that their bowling was an issue because they took Steyn with their platinum pick in the draft. But Steyn was not available at the beginning of the season due to international commitments, and then obviously left early due to the coronavirus at the end. And so as a result, they were heavily reliant on their domestic bowlers. And as I said, I just don't think they were quite up to the standards this year.
Yes, definitely. I think their bowling struggled a lot. And just looking at the Islamabad United's run rate, runs per over, and they scored at almost 9 runs per over in all of the matches that they played. But we have seen that most other teams, they have been able to score at at and around this run rate as well. So it's not like in the past when you put up a score of 180 or 190, and then it was almost impossible for other teams to chase it down. But this year we have seen that most other teams, they have been able to chase scores of 180, 190 with ease.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying as well that Islam. I mean, I completely agree with that point. I mean, it's the one, I suppose, caveat to Islamabad's season is that they've been pretty unlucky with the toss. The toss is massive in the PSL. It's I think the league that provides the biggest chasing advantage, and Islamabad had the worst record at the toss this year, which meant they were often batting first, which meant again with that weaker bowling attack, they had to judge a good score and probably go slightly above that. And it just makes things a little bit more difficult when you do win as few tosses as they did. And generally, I think it's important to recognise the role of luck, full stop, in all these T20 tournaments. Like, you know, they're often very short seasons. We've had quite a lot of rain around this year. I think rain hurt Islamabad too. That's not to make excuses for them. They are, you know, I think that their squad construction had some question marks around it. But they certainly were on the wrong end of a couple of luck-related things, such as the toss and some weather. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. But I think, you know, there are a lot of good signs there for Islamabad. I don't think they're that far away from a pretty good side. They've been, as I said, they've been one of the big three for a number of years. Those guys, Akif and Musa, who are young seamers, who obviously are encouraging talents. I think also Zafar Gohar was bowled well. So did Safi as well. Those two left-arm spinners probably could have played more than they did, actually. I think they had 3 games each. So there's the sort of essence of a bowling attack there, but it's just a bit young. And their batting was largely excellent. As I said, just a little bit more form for Asif Ali would have helped them maybe towards 10, 15 runs higher in certain matches, and that would have taken them across the line.
Yes, definitely. And just to add to your point, this season, from all the matches, the team that batted second, they won like 66.67% of the time. So like two-thirds of the time, the team that batted second, they won the game. So then we move on to Quetta Gladiators. So what do you think about them?
Quetta missed out only on net run rate in the end, obviously after their win in the final round robin match. But I think they're probably the least deserving of the 6 teams to qualify. They had the lowest run rate of all teams in the league this year, and the highest economy rate of all teams in the league this year, which suggests they had problems in both departments. Unlike Islamabad, they actually had a little bit of luck with the toss. They didn't actually win a particularly high percentage of tosses, but occasionally when they lost, they were actually asked to chase, which, as you said, chasing generally has been an advantage historically in the PSL and this year. So they had in that respect they had some luck. They were chasing a fair bit, but they just, as I said, problems with the bat and with the ball. One point that's worth making, I guess, is losing Umar Akmal just before the start of the season, literally in the day or two before the beginning of the season, was a huge blow. Obviously, Umar Akmal has been inconsistent, I think, safe to say, in T20 cricket across his career, but he is a destructive player. Domestic players are obviously really valuable. He was probably someone who would have played in most games, but was then unavailable, which was put them off on the wrong foot, I suppose. And then, broadly, I mean, there are 3 players that stand out who they take early in the draft. So Shahzad, Sarfraz, and Nawaz are platinum and diamond picks. All 3 of them had pretty poor seasons. Sarfraz started quite well; he was indifferent, but Shahzad, I think Shahzad's batting average was the lowest ever of a batsman in the PSL. Nawaz's form, both with bat and ball, was quite questionable. So when you have three guys who you take early in the draft struggling, that's going to leave you in a bit of trouble because you're going to be heavily reliant on guys around that. And I think that's what we could see through both their batting and their bowling. Their batting was heavily reliant on Watson and Cutting, who were probably the two standout players for them. And sometimes you can get away with batting being reliant on one or two guys if they have really, really good seasons. And whilst Cutting and Watson were good, they weren't phenomenal. And I think as a result, that left their batting in trouble. Jason Roy had a pretty indifferent season. Obviously, they took him with their first pick in the draft. He wasn't terrible, but you need more from your overseas player than I think Roy gave them, particularly when you get other Pakistani batsmen struggling as they did. When Roy is sort of scratching around for form a little bit, Shahzad, also in the top three, was in terrible form. That places a lot of pressure on Watson, who largely carried the load pretty well. But it's difficult to mount a title-winning team when you've got two of your top three struggling like that. And obviously Cutting came in late and bailed them out a couple of times with some really good innings. The bowling is in T20 we generally look at bowling and call it a weak link discipline, and by that we mean your bowling attack's only ever as strong as your weakest member. You can have two or three really good bowlers, but if one or two are struggling, then teams these days are good enough to capitalise on that. And I think with Quetta we saw that this year. Naseem was fantastic. Mills, when he played, was good. Hasnain was pretty good, but then the rest of the attack was guys like Sohail, Nawaz, Anwar Ali, Cutting, and then Fawad. All of them had pretty poor seasons, and I think teams playing against Quetta were just able to wait on those overs and take them down. And I think that was one of their real problems as well. So they had problems in both departments, with bat and with ball, heavily reliant on a couple of individuals. I think, and one other standout point I think was their spin bowling. So as I mentioned, Nawaz and Fawad both struggled. So their attack was a little bit one-dimensional. They had guys like Naseem and Hasnain who've got raw pace. They're exciting young talents, but when they needed to potentially play to matchups with spin, or if conditions weren't quite in their favour, then I think that they struggled due to the fact that their two frontline spinners had both had really poor seasons. So that's something they'll have to look forward to next year, particularly with Fawad being quite old now.
Yes, definitely. Nawaz and Fawad had very poor seasons, especially if you compare to last season, because both of them were fantastic. And just to add to your point, Quetta Gladiators conceded 9.03 runs per over, and which is the highest among all the teams. So their bowling was pretty poor.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. As I said, there are times when they bowl. It's you look at Naseem and Hasnain, and I think Mills snuck under the radar a bit, but Naseem and Hasnain being the main two sort of exciting young quicks, and it's very easy to get hyped up around Quetta's bowling attack when you watch those two. And it's like, God, how can they lose games when they've got those two leading the attack? But as I said, you need to have a complete bowling attack, and your attack is only as strong as its weakest member, and they had two or three guys really struggling, and that's what cost them, I think. But that said, they've got moving forward for Quetta, they have got those two players I identified obviously are two really good talents. Another guy who I thought was quite encouraging was Azam. He started the season quite well. He faded as it went on, but he looks to be quite a powerful hitter in the middle order. So that's something as well for them to. There's a little bit of hope there with some decent Pakistani youngsters. But yeah, Watson's obviously towards the end of his career now. He's been a really good servant for them for a number of years. But I think they've got a little bit of rebuilding to do, as you said, with Fawad as well towards the end of his career. So it'll be interesting to see how Quetta adjust their squad moving forward.
Yes, and although Hasnain also picked up quite a few wickets, he's the highest wicket taker in this season until now. But he also conceded almost 9 runs per over. So in the overs that he bowled. Yeah.
I suppose that's the nature of him bowling towards the sort of back end of the innings. But you're right, he wasn't. I've identified him there as a standout, but yeah, that's true. He was expensive as well, and I guess that's what you're going to get from guys who are young and quick like him. It sometimes can go wrong, but yeah, it'll be, as I said, interesting to see how they adjust things moving forward.
Yes, definitely. So then we move on to Peshawar Zalmi.
Yeah. Well, Peshawar, again, so this is the third member of the big three who finished fourth. So not only did two of the big three not qualify, but we've had the other member finish at the bottom of the pack. So it has, as I said, the league has really been given a bit of a shake this year. Zalmi's strength historically has been their domestic core. They've always had a good set of domestic players, or a very good set of domestic players. Kamran, Akmal, and Wahab Riaz are probably two of the greatest PSL players in many respects, who've obviously been at the core of Zalmi's team for a number of years. This year they added to that. And they've had Hassan Ali as well in years gone by, who's obviously not quite at the level he was a few years back, but he's still a reliable performer. And this year they added to that with Malik obviously coming in, and then uncovering Hyder Ali, who's been one of the finds of the season. And I think that's really been the reason for their ability to get through this year, is largely because of their domestic players. The stuff that's been going on with their overseas players, both on and off the pitch, is kind of amazing, really. It's been very chaotic handling of their overseas players. Obviously, we had the amazing situation with Darren Sammy, going from being a player to then for a captain to then a coach, and what was he playing? Was he not? That the whole way that unfolded was astonishing. I've never seen anything like that before. But not only Sammy, the way that the rest of the overseas players sort of were handled and things that went on were interesting. So obviously Pollard was meant to be coming in, he never arrived. Tom Banton was in the team, out of the team, opening the batting, not opening the batting. Liam Livingston was then batting down sort of in the middle order, which is he can do a job there. He's a very good player, but it was interesting that they never moved him up the order. Lewis Gregory was in and out. Liam Dawson was in and out. So there was a lot of chaos with their overseas players. But despite that, they managed to find a way. And I think that that's largely thanks to, as I said, their domestic players. Kamran and Wahab are the two standouts at the top and end of the team, at the top and bottom of the team, if you like. Kamran with the bat, obviously made that fantastic 100 early in the season, and Wahab. But both those players, I think it's worth saying, are criminally underrated within Pakistani cricket. I understand there are many reasons why Kamran, in particular, it divides opinion, but from a performance standpoint alone, and particularly with his batting, he's keeping obviously remains questionable, but his batting and Wahab's bowling are outstanding. They really are. I mean, Kamran is one of the best players of spin in the world, in any league, and Wahab is one of the best death bowlers in the world. And if you have those two in your team, you're always going to be in games. And obviously this year, as I said, they've uncovered Hyder Ali as well through the middle overs, who was fantastic too. So that sort of core has meant you're always going to be in games. Their batting was quite interesting. They generally have quite a deep batting order. They've had guys, someone like Wahab, for example, is low down as 9, and he's a decent hitter at times. They based their batting was they would go after things. It would be aggressive. They attacked the power play, and sometimes that came off, and sometimes it didn't. Essentially, throughout their innings, their batting was defined by high run rates and high dismissal rates. So they were scoring quickly but losing wickets often. Fortunately, with the batting depth they had, and with guys like Shoaib Malik as an anchor in the middle, they've sort of made that work. So that's the way they've gone about it with the bat. With the ball, they've generally been quite pace dominated. Again, they're another team a bit like Quetta, whose spinners they haven't really been able to rely on. Dawson is one of them, and then Yasir Shah, who came in halfway through the season. So whilst their batting has sort of been high octane, if you like, with a lot going on, their bowling was a bit more one-dimensional. They have defensive pace bowlers, guys who keep the run rate down, but they generally struggled to take wickets. I think one game, match 24, I think, against Lahore, they scored 187, which is a pretty good score on any track. And Lahore, I think, with 5 overs remaining, had 9 wickets in hand. They nearly made a bit of a mess of it, but they got home. And essentially, that sort of reflects their bowling. If you're defending, that reflects their season, really. If you're scoring 180 plus, you should certainly be in most games. But the fact that they only managed to take 1 wicket in the first 15 overs is indicative of the fact that they just lack potency. Wahab, as I've alluded to, is a really good defensive bowler. He comes back in the death overs, but they didn't really have anyone that they could throw the ball to for wickets, both quick bowler or spinner. Yasir obviously is a wrist spinner, but he's had mixed returns in T20. Hassan Ali's form's been up and down. And if you look at other sides like Multan and Lahore,
they've been able to throw the ball and Karachi, they've been able to throw the ball to someone who they can say, right, we need a wicket. You're going to get us one. And Zalmi didn't have that this year. And I think that's been probably their big weakness, is just the bowling is a bit one-dimensional. And they a bit like Islamabad, I suppose, they need to score really big to stay in the game because, they just lack potency with the ball.
Yes, definitely. And my point of view is that I think Peshawar Zalmi have lost a bit of intimidation that they used to have in the previous seasons, especially with Darren Sami in the middle, and together with Kieran Pollard. They made a deadly combo in power hitting, and also since there have been since Hassan Ali has been out of form, so I think they have lacked that wicket taker up front that they used to have. So I think they have lost a bit on many areas. So then we move on to Lahore Qalandars, who have definitely surprised a lot of people this season. So what do you think of them?
Yeah, well, they've finally done it, haven't they? After years of struggling at the bottom of the table, they've made it through to the playoffs for the first time. Actually, they're a really interesting team, and they're fascinating to watch because they produce some crazy matches, don't they? And they have some amazing players as well. Manage to win from positions that you never think they should win from, and they lose from positions that they never should lose from. They actually have, I think, the makings of quite a strong team overall. Like they've got their bowling attack of Shaheen, Ralph. Shinwari's obviously been out of form, but he's been an international performer in the past. Dilbar, and then with the bat, you've got Faka, Lin, Sohail Akhtar. There's a core there which should be quite good, and I think. But the reason that they've made the playoffs this year hasn't been because of I think sort of particularly good team performances or maybe or intelligent squad construction. They've actually just made it. They've made it through thanks to some superb individual performances. What they have. Sorry,
I will interrupt you. Maybe they don't use the data, as Shadab said.
Well, yeah. So this is I think if I was to be involved in building Lahore's squad, I would not build it like they've built it. As I said, there's some serious questions around their squad construction. They've ended up with sort of a core that might work, and we'll see how that goes in years to come. But what they've done this year is they've made it thanks to individual brilliance. They've got probably the best batsman in the league in Chris Lynn. They've got the best bowler in the league in Shaheen. They've got probably the best, most destructive batsman against spin in Ben Dunk. And those three players have played a huge role in the games that they have won. And they've won enough games to get through, and they've won enough games to get through thanks largely to those three. And then also Samit Patel on that pitch that turned square against Quetta had a match-winning hand. But essentially what you've got there is three and then forward Samit, players who have stood up and had given really big performances and got them across the line. And that's what I guess, that's a way of playing T20 cricket, if you like, is throw together some star players, and sometimes it does work. We've seen it in the past with teams like RCB in the Big Bash, in the IPL and Brisbane in the Big Bash, with guys like Lynn and McCullum. If you do pick enough star players, sometimes it does come off, and sometimes you do make it through to the playoffs. And I think that's what's happened this year. I wouldn't say it's the method. It's a particularly good method for long-term sustained success because it produces high variance results. Generally, sometimes if Lynn does come off, then brilliant. But if he doesn't, then you're in trouble. That's the way that Lahore go about it. And this year, for the first time, it's worked enough. There are two clear areas for me that's worked for them, and that's power hitting. So that goes to the Lynn and Dunk thing. They've got the highest boundary percentage of any team in the league. And then the other thing that's massive, and this is really key, and it shows that even when you have got a questionable squad such as Lahore's, if you take early wickets in T20s, you're going to be in the game. And that is what they've done this year better than any other side. They've got the lowest strike rate in the phase. The combination of Shaheen with his aggressive, pitch it up, swing, pace, new ball bowling, and Samit Patel, who is a power play specialist, particularly in these conditions, has proven really, really difficult for teams to counter. And I think that's the, if you're getting teams 20 for 2, 30 for 3, However badly constructed your rest of your team is, however crazy your batting approach is, however much you slog in the power play and try and hit out, as Lahore often do, you're still going to be in the game, because taking early wickets is probably the single biggest driver towards T20 success. And they've done that really well. So yeah, Lahore, as I said, I don't think I still seriously doubt whether they've got a squad for long-term success. As I said, they've got some good individuals, and that's what's taken them through, I think, this season.
Yes, definitely. It has been down to individual performances for them. Even though some other players, they have come together, like their captain. He has played a good hand as well, together with Ben Dunk and Chris Lynn. So I think they have gathered some good momentum in the last few matches, and they will be difficult to beat in the semi-finals as well.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I think they're a dangerous team. That's definitely the best way to summarize them. It's not, if I was an opposition side, I would be worried when I was playing against them, simply because you just don't know what you're going to get. And in years gone by, it's not worked out. This year it has, and they've made it through. So let's see how far they can get.
yes. So, just to add to your points, Chris Lynn has scored almost 79% of his runs in boundaries, and Ben Dunk's 74.5% runs in boundaries. And Ben Dunk, he has taken only 6.2 balls to hit 1/6 in PSL. And he has one of the least number. He has taken one of the least number of balls, like 2.14 balls to hit a 4. So these are really good numbers. So then I will want to move on to Karachi Kings.
Yep. Well, I think a lot of people before the season earmarked these guys as one of the favourites, and they've made it through in second. I think they've got a very strong core. Sharjeel and Babar at the top, Hales and Walton through the middle, and then Jordan and Amir with the ball. That is that's 6 really strong players, a strong spine around which to build your team. That the rest of the team has sort of had mixed performances. Some guys have done well, some guys have done badly, but they found enough. They've got the guys who have come in the bowling attack in particular. They've had guys like Umar, Yamin, Arshad, Umaid, who've all come in and out. They've not played consistently, but when they have come in, they've occasionally put in a match-winning performance. They've not been there performing week in, week out, but they've done enough to get by. They've done enough to complement that core. And I think that the fact that they've got that core, but then they've also got those guys who've sort of not quite been able to nail down a spot or have been in and out of form, I mean, they've produced some kind of imbalanced cricket. They've had periods of the game where they've been well on top, and then they've suddenly sort of found a way to maybe lose the game. I mean, the most recent example was right towards the end, match 28 against Islamabad. Chasing a low total, they got off to an absolute flyer in the power play. It was 70 odd for none. And then managed to nearly lose it with a sort of choke in the middle against spin. And that, I think, sums up the fact that they've got some really good players and then some players who we're a little bit less sure about. They've been, with the bat, they've been brilliant in the power play. I mean, Sharjeel and Babar could well be Pakistan's opening combination in the World T20 later this year. Left hand, right hand, strong against pace, strong against spin. Sharjeel being the aggressive power play maximizer, Babar being the anchor. That's generally worked pretty well. Their batting, I think their dismissal rate in the power play is the best among all teams, i.e. they've lost wickets least often. That's given them solid starts. But then what they've struggled with a bit has been batting against spin. Hales is notorious. Hales actually has had a really good season, but more generally, Karachi have in the middle overs been choked a little bit by spin, and then they've come back at the death. So their batting against pace has been pretty good. They've struggled against spin slightly. In the power with the ball, they've been good in the power play in the sense they've been economical. Amir is fantastic up top. Again, him and Shaheen have been 2 standout players for me this year, just with their attacking new ball bowling, looking for wickets. Shaheen's been more effective at taking those wickets. Amir has been a little bit more economical. So they've generally kept teams quiet in the early stages with the ball. But their spinners, they haven't really got attacking spin bowlers. Guys like Imad and Umair are left-arm spinners who are generally run savers. So they've struggled a little bit to take wickets with their spinners. One thing as well that stood out for me has been quite interesting. They've only played 3 overseas players quite often. They've had Hales, Walton, and Jordan have generally been their 3. Delport occasionally 2, but they've not always played. They've not always played the full allocation, which has been quite an interesting tactic. But yeah, generally, I think, as I said, that people thought they'd be good before the season, and I think they have been pretty solid. And that's thanks largely to that core that I mentioned.
Yes, definitely. Their bowling has been one of the better ones in PSL. I think they have conceded the second least number of runs per over among all the teams, behind Multan Sultans. So we will. That leads us on to the number 1 team after the round robin stage. That is Multan Sultans. What has worked for them this time?
Yeah, well, I mean, they've been excellent, haven't they? I think the thing that sort of summed up the way that Multan's played has been control. They've played very controlled cricket. With the bats, they've basically matched the league run rate. So they've scored at the level we probably expect them to score at. And with the ball, they've been well below the league economy rate. So their bowling has been their key strength. Their batting has essentially done a job. And that, I think you'll see that around the world with teams that are successful in T20. They generally prioritise having strong bowling attacks. Strong bowling attacks typically lead to consistent results and sustained success. They've built a really strong bowling attack of Junaid, Tanvir, Irfan as domestic quicks, and then Afridi, Tahir, and Moeen are elite spinners. They've bowled a lot of spin. That's something that has stood out in the PSL. Generally, teams don't bowl that much spin, which is quite strange. People often think of subcontinental cricket with a lot of spin bowlers coming to the fore, but generally the PSL is pace dominated. But Multan have gone down with a pretty spin-heavy strategy. Around 40% of their overs have been bowled by spin. And Afridi, Tahir, and Moeen are really good spinners. And then they've, as I said, complemented that with Irfan, Junaid, and Tanvir as good domestic quicks. They've not always picked those guys. Have been a bit in and out. Their form's been a bit up and down. Tanvir's been the standout. Irfan and Junaid have come in and out. And that's 5 really good bowlers there. So as I said, I was talking earlier about the fact that bowling is a weak link discipline. Your bowling attack is only as strong as its weakest member. For Multan, that's 5 bowlers there who are really strong. They've obviously also had Ilyas and Shafiq as the emerging players who've been in there, but they've generally done a job. It's hard to always rely on those emerging players, but they've been pretty good. So Multan's, as I said, Multan's strength has come from that really strong bowling attack. And what they've also done well, and I think there's credit to Shan Masood, the captain, is they've been quite aggressive with the ball. They've looked for wickets. They've played to matchups quite well. They've generally tried to bring on guys who are going to remove batsmen, and that's helped. I think they've got the ability to take wickets throughout the innings has slowed the scoring of the opposition. So generally their bowling has done the sort of the legwork, if you like, for their side, and their batting, as I said, has kind of just been sort of doing what they've needed to do. They've had quite a fluid batting order, which has been interesting. I think we know that they're a very analytically driven team, and that's reflected in the fact that they've moved their batting order around quite a bit. Often people will look at that and sort of say, "Oh, if they keep changing their batting order, it's a sign of instability." And it might be in some teams who are struggling, it is. But with Multan, they've been winning, and it's actually been, I think, a sign that they've been, thinking about who they want to be batting against certain players in different periods of the game, and they've done that really well. They've had a lot of left-handers, which has helped them do that too. Rousseau and Moeen are two lefties who like to take on the spin, and I think that's worked out for them a couple of times. So yeah, their batting is not as strong as their bowling, but it's done a job. There's been no standout player. Everyone's contributed in different periods. Moeen, Rousseau, Vince, Shan has done pretty well as a sort of anchor player. He's not particularly well suited to T20, but it's worked out for him. And then obviously the Pakistani guys, Zishan and Kushdil, who we maybe know a little bit less about, have come in and also contributed too. So their batting is, as I said, it's not their strongest suit, but they've made it work. And yeah, their success has been sort of founded on their bowling.
Yes, that's right. So we are done with the review of all the teams. So I would like us to look forward to the two semifinals that are going to be played tomorrow. So in the first semifinal, it's going to be Multan Sultans against Peshawar Zalmi. And now we know that some of the overseas players have left these teams, and in this case, Peshawar Zalmi have been affected heavily since most of their first 11 overseas players have left in the form of Carlos Brathwaite, Liam Dawson, Tom Benton, and others. So for Multan Sultans, it has been they have seen departure of Riley Rousseau, who was one of the best batsmen in this season, and their opener James Vince. So how do you see those teams now in the current scenario? How do you see them matching tomorrow?
Yeah, well, as you said, I mean, Zalmi losing the overseas players that they have lost is a huge blow. Whereas Multan with Moeen, Bapara, and Tahir have managed to hang on to three of their overseas players. So just even from that point, they're at an advantage. Multan also obviously finished top, and Zalmi finished fourth. So heading into this game, you certainly see Multan as favourites. They beat them in both previous round robin matches as well. So the overseas balance, the position in the league, the head-to-head, all points towards Multan. I think it's an interesting matchup actually between two in terms of how they play their game, particularly when Peshawar are batting. As I said, Peshawar's approach with the bat has been very aggressive. They've gone at the ball hard. They've lost quite a lot of early wickets, or wickets throughout the innings even, but they've sort of kept going because they've got deep batting order. Obviously, that might be a little bit different now. Now that they've lost those overseas players, we saw Wahab promoted to number 3 in the last game to try and cover for that lack of batting depth. It'll be interesting to see if they do pull any decisions like that in the semi. But Multan's bowling has been defined by control. So what you've got here is you've got Multan on one hand being a very controlling side who keep the run rate down, and Peshawar who like to go at the bowlers and attack. So that side of things I think will be interesting. Multan have also been quite spin heavy this year. As I said, around 40% of their overs have been bowled by spin. Peshawar have been one of the better batting teams against spin. Kamran and Haider are both really good players of spin. So whilst Multan, I think, go into this game as favourites, there are some opportunities there for Peshawar. Multan's probably their biggest weakness has been their power play bowling. They've been a little bit expensive at times. The 2 games they've lost, obviously against Islamabad early on when Ronki got after them, and then yesterday against Lahore when Lin and Faka got after them, has shown that obviously that was a severely depleted Multan attack. But I think that the point stands that they are a little bit vulnerable in the power play. So Peshawar's aggressive approach early on could work for them. If they can get off to a good start, then I think they're going to put themselves in quite a nice position, because as I said, that Haider and Kamran strengthily spin, and Multan then bowling a lot of spin through the middle could put Peshawar in a good spot. So that I think the game might be won and lost in that batting power play for Zalmi. Early wickets for Multan will be massive. But yeah, for me, if I put my neck on the line with the prediction, I'll say Multan are favourites. But I could see Peshawar turning them over with getting off to a quick start in the power play.
Yep. Okay, so then the second semi-final, which is between the 2 arch rivals, Lahore Qalandars and Karachi Kings. So there we have home advantage for Lahore Qalandars because the match will be played at Gaddafi Stadium in Lahore, and the Lahore Qalandars, they have managed to win 4 games out of their 6, and they have lost they have won 4 games at Gaddafi Stadium and lost 2. And also they have managed to retain all of their overseas players. So how do you see Lahore Qalandars against Karachi Kings?
Yeah, well, interesting. I mean, I think Chris Lynn and David Visa are now going home from the PSL, which is a blow to Lahore. I think initially the match had been set up as sort of Lahore's star players. As I said, they were very much dependent on individual performances throughout the group stage against Karachi, who are probably a little bit more of a well-rounded team unit. But now, obviously, no Lin and no Visa hurts Lahore in that respect. So I certainly, again, for me, there are clear favourites here going into this game, and that is Karachi. Karachi have hung on to the majority of their overseas players, whereas Lahore, who have lost a couple. In the league stage, we had two very different matches when these two guys met. In the first game was obviously the match where Dunk tore the left arm spinners to shreds and pulled a win out of nowhere for Lahore. And then the game only a few days later after that, Karachi thrashed Lahore with a near perfect display. So we've seen two quite different matches. I think Karachi have Karachi have learnt their lessons from that game when Dunk amazingly pulled a victory out of nowhere. I think that game showed. I think the problem there was that Karachi bowled their left arm spinners to Dunk through the middle, and Dunk got after them. I think he scored 50 or 14 balls from Imad and Umair. Whereas in the following game, a couple of days later, he didn't face any bowling from left arm spin, and Karachi attacked him with short lengths and bouncers essentially, and tried to bounce him out, and that worked for them. So it seemed that they learnt their lessons from that. I think Karachi match up pretty well with Lahore. Obviously now no Lin, but Imad in the power play against Sohail is a good matchup for them. Amir in the power play against Fakar is a good matchup. If they keep some spin away from Dunk, I think as well that they'll be pretty well placed. They're definitely the favourites for me heading into this game. But Lahore, as we know, are dangerous. Guys like Shaheen. I mean, that Karachi's batting power play will be really interesting. Shaheen and Samit have been brilliant. As we said, Lahore's strength has been early wickets. So I suppose that if they can manage to try and break that Sharjeel and Babar pairing at the top and get into Karachi's softer middle, which we alluded to, obviously they've generally got off to pretty good starts thanks to Babar and Sharjeel. But if Lahore can get a couple of early wickets and expose the middle order, then they might give themselves a chance. But I think, broadly speaking, I see Karachi as favourites heading into this game.
All right. So, yeah, it will certainly be a very exciting game. So it will be a kind of a final between these two teams as well. And
the point is as well at this stage, we're in knockout cricket now. Anything can happen. So I wouldn't, you certainly can't write off any of these sides. Lahore in particular on their day can be really, really destructive. And dangerous. So anyone can win on the day. That's the thing with knockout cricket. It's obviously a shame, I suppose, that the playoff system has been changed this year because Multan and Karachi, who I think are probably deserving of a slight advantage, now don't have that advantage. Obviously, with the system having changed. But yeah, I think for me, Multan and Karachi look to be the two favourites going into these semis, but it could easily go either way. And I'm going to keep backing. I'll back Multan to go all the way if they do make it to the final against Karachi as well.
Okay. So just one last question. So if you have to pick three best batsmen and three best bowlers in this season's PSL, who would you pick?
Good question. We've seen a lot of good performers. The bowlers, I think there's been one definite standout for me, and that's been Shaheen. He's, I think, one of the best bowlers in the world at the moment. I think the way that he bowls in the power play is fantastic. He pitches the ball up and looks for movement. He's taken early wickets, and I think if it wasn't for him, Lahore wouldn't be anywhere near the playoffs. Similarly, but not quite as sensationally, Amir has been really good yet again in that phase. Pakistan are blessed with some really good quick left arm swing bowlers, as they have been throughout history. So those two really stand out as bowlers. Naseem Shah's also been really good. He's a bit more raw, but his pace has been really exciting. So those three, and again, the Pakistan Super League is renowned for producing domestic quicks and overseas batsmen. So it's a little surprise there that my three standout bowlers are all Pakistani, and my three batsmen are all actually overseas. I think I've listed here. I've got Ben Dunk, who's been, who's played some phenomenal innings. I think his innings against Karachi is arguably one of the great T20 innings of all time. To rescue that match, they were on the brink of elimination really at that point. Had they lost that game, they wouldn't have qualified. They were up against it. The run rate was spiraling at that point. And then, he pulled it out of the fire. So he's been brilliant. Alex Hales for Karachi, I think, snuck under the radar a little bit. But he's actually played really well in an unfamiliar role. Sharjeel and Babar have generally got through the power play. As I said, Karachi have got one of the best dismissal rates in the first 6. So he's not come in early, which is what he's used to. He's used to batting in the power play. He's actually batted through the middle, but he's still been really good, which is, I think, been an encouraging development for him. And then the other overseas batsman I've gone for is Ben Cutting, who played a couple of phenomenal innings. Cutting is one of the most destructive hitters of pace in the world. His record against spin is terrible. I'd just save any spin overs for Cutting if I was an opposition captain. But if you're bowling pace to him, you're in trouble. And he played a couple of really good knocks early on in the season. But then there's a special mention as well, I think, for Haider Ali, who's probably been the find of the season from a Pakistani perspective. It's telling there that, as I said, I've named 3 overseas batsmen. You don't normally see Pakistani batsmen emerge in the PSL. The guys who've dominated have typically been household names already, guys like Kamran, Malik, players such as Babar. But Haider is a breakthrough star. Obviously, it's early days still. We've only seen a handful of games, but he looks to be a serious talent. And I think that there's a genuine chance that he'll force his way into the Pakistani team for the World Cup. He plays spin really well. He's got genuine power, which is rare for a Pakistani. I think the only other Pakistani player I can think of who's can sort of match him for power in the past few years is Asif Ali, who's obviously, as we know, taken a bit of a dive in terms of form, which has been a shame to see. But yeah, Haider has been a real find and certainly someone to look out for moving into the future.
Yes, definitely some talent in batting as well this season that Pakistan has found, along with some of the established ones. So here I would like to finish this podcast. So if there are any shout outs that you want to give, Freddie?
No, nothing other than thanks for having me. And as you said at the top of the show, with the lack of cricket on now, if you want to get yourself a copy of Cricket 2.0, that would be great. You can get it on Amazon. The links are on my Twitter page. So yeah, that could be a good way to pass the time as we wait for cricket to return. And everyone has to self-isolate. So yeah, stay safe.
Yes, that's definitely the message. Yes, thank you for coming on and analyzing in detail.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great having you. Thank you. Bye-bye.